My name is Lisa. I'm 35 years old and I work part-time. I live with my husband Mark and our daughter Emma. Mark works in an office, and Emma goes to first grade. We bought an old house and we still owe money for it. When Emma started school, I got a part-time job to help pay for the house. Mark's older sister Nancy got married before us. She lives with her dad, Mark's dad, in their family home. Nancy thinks she should have the house because she got married first. She says she'll take care of their dad, so she should get the house. Nancy's mom had already passed away when she got married, so she didn't need to take care of her dad at the time. The house where Mark's parents live is really big, and I remember being surprised when I saw it before we got married. It had a fancy gate and a lot of land around it, which made me wonder if Mark's parents were rich. When Mark and I were dating, he didn't seem very wealthy, so seeing his parents' big house was a shock. Mark said his family used to be rich, but they lost money over the years. He joked that even though his grandparents' house was big, it was old and not very comfortable to live in. He said it was amazing that his parents' house with its big piece of land was still in a nice neighborhood. I understand why Nancy, Mark's sister, wants to keep the house for herself. She kicked Mark out of the house if she could live there. She probably wants to own the land and house herself. But I don't know if Nancy actually owns the house now. When Mark and I got married, he said that since Nancy would take care of their dad, I wouldn't have to. We planned to let Nancy inherit the house. That's why we bought our own house. It might make their dad feel better to be taken care of by his daughter instead of me if he ever gets sick and needs help. When we go to visit Mark's family for Christmas or summer holidays, Nancy doesn't treat her dad very well. Even during meals, it feels like he's not part of the family. If Mark or I try to sit with him, Nancy gets upset and says he prefers to eat alone. After meals, when I talk to my father-in-law in his room, he tells me he's not happy living there because Nancy causes problems. He says he always eats separately from Nancy's family and gets less food. But Nancy still takes a lot of money from him, even though he only has his pension. Nancy doesn't do his laundry or help with chores much. My father-in-law does most of the cleaning and gardening because Nancy ignores him. Even her husband and kids don't treat him well. When my father-in-law asked Nancy's husband for a ride to the horse race track, he got yelled at. Nancy's son, who's 10, is rude to my father-in-law, saying he smells and should stay in his room. It seems like my father-in-law doesn't remember ever holding his grandson, even though they've lived together since he was born. When my daughter visits, my father-in-law loves spending time with her. He tells her she's his only grandchild, sounding a bit lonely. Hearing this makes me feel sorry for him. Whenever we go to his house, my husband gets upset and tells Nancy to treat their dad better. But Nancy gets angry with my husband, accusing him of trying to take the house away from her. I won't let anyone take this house, my husband insists. It's worrying how much Nancy cares about the house. Then, my father-in-law had a fall at home. The house isn't set up for elderly people, and he tripped over a small step, breaking his right hand. Luckily, he didn't have any other injuries and didn't need to go to the hospital, but it's hard for him to do anything without his right hand. When we visited him, we were shocked to see how weak he'd become. Not only can he not use his right hand, but he can hardly move his feet and clearly needs help. But Nancy's family completely ignores him and doesn't take care of him. He can still manage to get to the bathroom by himself, but eating is really hard for him. My husband confronted my sister-in-law right away. "Why aren't you looking after Dad?" But she didn't seem to understand why he was upset and just laughed it off. A broken hand is no big deal. He can walk by himself, and he's not complaining. It seemed like my father-in-law, used to being ignored, couldn't stand up to my sister-in-law, and she probably knew it. My husband was even more angry. "Isn't it obvious we should take care of our parents?" When he said that, my sister-in-law smirked and said, "You can take care of Dad. I don't want an old man with hardly any money." I was furious at how my sister-in-law could talk about her own father like that. She even said, taking care of a father who only gets a small pension isn't worth it. Her words were so mean that I lost my temper and spoke up. "Fine, we'll take care of him. He won't heal properly if he stays here." My husband agreed, and we decided to take my father-in-law and leave his house right away. While we were packing up my father-in-law's things, my sister-in-law started saying we couldn't have the house just because we were taking care of Dad. She cared more about the house than her own father and didn't have much else to say. My husband brushed off her comments, saying, "Don't worry, I already bought a house. I don't need this one. Do whatever you want with it." My sister-in-law seemed relieved to hear that. Even as we were getting ready for my father-in-law to move, my sister-in-law and her husband didn't help. Instead, they were mostly interested in checking if there were any valuable items among his belongings. They were probably relying on his pension, but with him leaving, that would stop. They hoped to find something valuable they could sell for cash, but they didn't find anything valuable. When my father-in-law left his house, my sister-in-law and her family didn't bother to say goodbye. They were very cold-hearted. When my father-in-law arrived at our house, he seemed much happier as he played with my daughter. He was like a different person compared to when he was living at his old house. We let him stay in a room that we weren't using, but because the move happened suddenly, we couldn't make any preparations. If we had known earlier, we could have done some renovations, like installing handrails and removing steps. I said to my father-in-law, feeling sorry that we weren't fully prepared, "I'll install the handrails later." To my surprise, my father-in-law also apologized. "I'm sorry for making you worry. I wonder if $200 million will be enough to take care of me and my horses." I couldn't help but laugh. Was my father-in-law making jokes now? He seemed much happier since moving in with us. "Horses?" I chuckled, knowing it was unlikely. "I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses, but taking care of you will probably cost more." I couldn't understand why my father-in-law brought up horses, but his joke seemed way over the top, like something a wealthy person might say. But when I saw his worried face after my response, I started to worry too. He asked, "Does taking care of a person really cost that much?" "All I have left is $200 million. Looking at his serious expression, I realized he wasn't joking earlier. I panicked and tried to explain that my previous comment was just a joke. $200 million is more than enough. It's actually too much. I rushed to my husband to ask about the horses and the $200 million. He was just as confused, but then he remembered something about his grandfather being a landowner. "Remember how I told you my granddad was wealthy? Maybe Dad used to own horses." My husband and I decided to talk to my father-in-law to get the full story. It turned out that he had been owning horses for years, and his trips to the racetrack were actually to check on his own horses, not to bet. He had kept this a secret from his family, so my husband and his sister had no clue about it. Now, with his broken hand and thinking about his future, he worried that if he mentioned owning horses and having $200 million in assets, his daughter and son-in-law might demand it all. He got concerned when I mentioned making home modifications, thinking it might trigger their demands. That's why he decided to tell me about his horse ownership and finances. Understanding the situation, my husband reassured his father, saying, "I'm not sure how much it costs to take care of horses. If you've got $200 million, you should be okay. We'll handle your caregiving expenses, so don't worry about it." His confident words reassured me too. After checking with the person who had always looked after the horses, we made sure there wouldn't be any issues, and we'd put the horse matter to rest. Now that I knew my father-in-law was quite wealthy, I started to see him in a different way. I couldn't help but think that his daughter, who had kicked him out despite his wealth, would regret it once she found out the truth. The idea of her regret brought me some satisfaction. Since my father-in-law moved in with us, our lives had changed. It was busy juggling my part-time job and taking care of him, but my husband helped, and we managed. Having my father-in-law at home brought a new companion for my daughter, and he seemed happier too. His walking had improved since he moved in, and even though we hadn't finished the home modifications yet, he could walk slowly with a cane. Although his broken hand hadn't healed yet, he was practicing eating with his left hand. In his old home, my father-in-law didn't move around much because his nephew would complain whenever he left his room. Even when he tried to go to the racetrack, his son-in-law would seem annoyed. This lack of activity might have contributed to his muscles weakening and his fall. On sunny days, he enjoyed going for walks with my daughter. I had been so focused on my father-in-law's recovery that I hadn't thought much about my sister-in-law. However, 3 months after my father-in-law moved in with us, my sister-in-law called in a panic. "Is Dad there? If he is, get him on the phone right away." But at that moment, my father-in-law was out for a walk with my husband and daughter. When I told her that, she got even angrier. "You knew, didn't you? You knew that house was rented. That's why you took Dad to cause problems for us." I was confused by what she said. She seemed to be suggesting that their house was rented, but she had always boasted that it was theirs. While it might still be in my father-in-law's name, calling it a rented house didn't add up. As I struggled to respond, my sister-in-law became even more upset. Some man claiming to be the landlord of our family home showed up, saying I'm behind on rent and that I need to either pay up or leave. I was even more confused when she mentioned the landlord of the in-laws' home. Shouldn't it be my father-in-law? Did he go to collect rent for my sister-in-law? Just then, my father-in-law returned, so I quickly explained the situation and had him answer my sister-in-law's call. With a hint of anger in his voice, my father-in-law spoke to the daughter who had driven him out of his own home. Weren't you told that the house was rented? That house belongs to the company where my father was the CEO. I've been paying the rent until you kicked me out. My father-in-law sounded distant, and my sister-in-law, sensing his anger, shouted from the phone, I haven't heard anything about this. I'm coming over right now, so wait for me. About 30 minutes later, my sister-in-law and her husband arrived, looking flushed and surprised to see my father-in-law walking on his own. But there were bigger issues to address as my sister-in-law erupted once more. I thought the land and house belonged to you, Dad. Did you deceive me? My sister-in-law's husband asked. All that aside, can you please pay the rent? If you don't, we'll be kicked out of the house. My father-in-law laughed it off. Why should I pay rent for a house where I'm not living? After you guys kicked me out, don't you think that's a bit too much to ask? Unable to respond to my father-in-law's reasonable statement, my brother-in-law fell silent. This time, my sister-in-law began to speak. Dad, were you planning to make us struggle from the beginning? You seem far more energetic than when you were living with us, even though you pretended to be injured. To address my sister-in-law's strange accusation, I intervened. That's because he's been doing rehabilitation exercises every day, working on walking, and practicing using his injured hand for eating. My father-in-law chimed in, reinforcing my words. I actually think being kicked out by you guys was a blessing. Since I came to live with Mark, we all eat together, and I'm never made to feel like a nuisance. Upon hearing this, my sister-in-law and her husband fell silent, their jaws clenching shut. Then, right on cue, my daughter came and unwittingly revealed my father-in-law's true status. Grandpa, your horse is going to race in the next horse race, right? My father-in-law grinned and replied, yes, it'll be in this Sunday's race. Why don't we go watch it together? My daughter happily dashed off, but my sister-in-law and her husband seemed to grasp the significance of this. They hastily asked my father-in-law, Dad, do you own a horse? Are you a horse owner? My father-in-law replied, a smug look on his face. I stayed silent because I knew if I mentioned money, you'd try to take it. And I know talking about horse racing always makes your husband frown. With that, my father-in-law's previously cheerful demeanor turned serious. His intimidating expression sent shivers down my spine. And as he began to speak slowly, the tension in the room intensified. I no longer consider someone like you, who disrespects your own father, as my daughter. I knew you only moved in with me for the inheritance. Caught off guard by my father-in-law's stern words, my sister-in-law was visibly stunned. With the final blow, my father-in-law declared, you won't get a single cent of my inheritance. Upon hearing this, my sister-in-law appeared shocked and stumbled backward. Her husband, who had been trying to support her, looked defeated and left the room. The rent for my father-in-law's house was a hefty sum, and it was impossible for my sister-in-law and her husband to afford it. So inevitably, they had to move out. I had no idea that my parents-in-law's house was rented, and my husband didn't know either. He later confirmed it with his father. After moving out, my sister-in-law, who had been spending money recklessly without worrying about rent, suddenly found herself in a financial crisis. Their spending habits were hard to break, and they started relying on credit cards to make ends meet, which only resulted in mounting debt. I heard that my sister-in-law and her husband, unable to rely on my father-in-law anymore, moved to her husband's parents' house, but I'm not sure what happened after that. Meanwhile, things have been going well for us since we started living with my father-in-law. My father-in-law, who had previously broken his hand, healed well, and his legs and hips became stronger to the point where he could do everything on his own. He's now so energetic that he goes jogging with my daughter. He's like a completely different person from when we first moved in. Since that incident, my father-in-law has been having discussions with my husband and thinking about the future, even drafting a will. I'm not sure what's in the will, but I assume he's arranged things so that his daughter won't inherit anything. What made me happiest was when my father-in-law paid off the remaining balance of our home loan. We still had nearly 20 years of payments left, but I'm grateful that he paid it off ahead of schedule. With the loan fully paid, my father-in-law is considering doing some renovations to our home to make it more accessible. He talks about his plans with a smile, but I don't want him to talk about becoming bedridden. I want him to stay healthy for as long as possible.